Hello and good evening. Tonight we're back in England land to look at a whole series of very similar and very successful 1960s and 70s racing vehicles from that center of great automotive engineering, Salford, which is actually part of the larger Manchester development area, but that's as may be. These cars, the Chevrons, were the product of the mind of one Mr. Derek Bennett, a relatively local Mancunian and self-taught automotive engineer and sometime racer. His early forays into the sport were born out of an interest and apprenticeship in electrical engineering, which by the age of 21 had turned into a job building and repairing cars, as well as racing in his spare time, first in a stock car and subsequently with a self-built midget. His work and extracurriculars helped him build a rather solid book of business, and he was able to build a more robust clubman's class vehicle that proved sufficiently successful to merit orders from other competitors, and led him to set up shop producing the vehicle, which would be retroactively deemed the B1. A number of open-wheelers followed until the B4, 6, and 8, all very similar-looking coupes that competed in groups 4 and 6, with the B8 a particular favorite of mine from an aesthetics perspective, especially this car with its alternative martini-ish livery and driven by one Mr. Brian Johnson, late of AC/DC. The B16 was the next sports car after another rash of Formula 2 and 3 vehicles, which started life as a coupe with somewhat similar aesthetics to the contemporaneous Lola T70 Mark III and Coupe T160, until Brian Redman pointed out the extra weight of the roof and styling features would have a negative impact on the shorter club circuits in which the vehicle saw most of its use, and thus brought about the decapitation of a single model as a testbed. Somewhere around this time, the firm had to relocate to a larger space than the small Salfordian garage in which they had started, but rather than move down to southern England to slum it with the rest of the sports car manufacturers around London and the country's better-known racetracks, they remained Lancastrians and simply moved a few miles down the road to Ipswich.
I understand that this is Bolton.
Yeah?
But you told me it was Ipswich.
It was a pun.
A pun?
No, not a pun. No, what's the other thing which reads the same backwards as forwards?
A palindrome?
Yeah.
It's not a palindrome. The palindrome of Bolton would be not-lob. It don't work.
The Chevron vehicle ethos had, by this time, started to become codified into standard operational procedure and was straightforward, charming in its simplicity. Rather than bring in radical new designs every couple of years that may or may not work out, the recipe for success was slowly distilled from season to season, with the B16 Spider the true start of a series of open-top, 2-liter cars that culminated in the late 70s and continued to see use in international competition until 1987. Going all the way back to the B6, the Chevron chassis had been a reinforced steel and duralumin tube space frame, with increasing quantities of these materials replaced with lighter aluminum, or, given the origin of these vehicles, aluminium, although that's the only time I'm going to call it that for the sake of flow, reinforcements to save weight without compromising strength. The earlier versions of our main focus, the B19 through 36s, were typically powered by the Cosworth FVC engine. While other powertrain options were available, the Cosworth was the most popular choice. Suspension on the early cars, and really throughout the line, was double wishbones with coilovers in the front, with links, trailing arms, and coil springs over dampers in the rear, while stopping power was from vented disc brakes. The powertrain components varied slightly by model number, and I'll call them out as they are mentioned in turn. As the B16 Spider was a one-off, but had proven the viability of the design with racing success, Bennett started series production of the vehicle as the B19, offered for the 1971 season and seeing a, for the time and nature of the vehicle, colossal 35 cars ordered from the likes of Niki Lauda, Jody Scheckter, and Brian Redman, who replaced his B16 Spider with one. This car produced 245 horsepower from its 1.8-liter Cosworth engine, attached to a 5-speed Hewland manual gearbox, who seemed to be the primary provider of British gearboxes for all applications in those days, even up to those Chevy V8s we had in the Lolas. Weight was a respectably light 550 kilos or 1,212 pounds, thanks to fiberglass body panels that spared little extra weight on the styling cues that had typified some of the earlier Chevrons, but also grâce à how gosh darn tiny these things really are. This shot is next to an Audi A3, which is by no means a large car. Here's one with a GT40, and here are two admittedly quite blurry but somewhat still compelling shots next to a contemporaneous small family car, a Ford Capri RS, and a slightly more modern and much more flamey Di Tommaso Pantera. Anyway, the B19's race debut came at Oulton Park in 1971, taking victory on its debut and finding quick success in the season. However, its popularity also proved a bit of a disadvantage as well, and the year's 2-liter European Sports Car Championship went to Helmut Marko in a Lola T212, who posted consistently good results throughout the season against a whole passel of B19s who fought each other for points. The Springbok Southern African Series also went to a Lola, as the Chevron entries were largely experimenting with running larger 2-liter Cosworth engines that, while fast, were unreliable and lost 2 critical races to the T212. The B16 Spider had the previous year swept the season with Brian Redman at the wheel, supported by co-drivers Richard Dickie Atwood and John Love, except for the Kyalami 9-hour race, which went to a larger vehicle. 1972 saw the B19 incrementally improved to the B21, with a slightly lower weight, 490 kilos or 1,080 pounds, and about 10 more horsepower from the Cosworth power plant. Several B19s were upgraded to B21 spec, and an additional 28 chassis were produced. A BMW engine version, special ordered by Dieter Quester, who would later achieve prominence driving a BMW 3 CSL for Schnitzer, and notoriety for scoring a DTM podium at the Avos on his roof, won the B21's first victory at Salzburgring, and a Cosworth-powered car driven by John Hine and John Bridges took class wins at the 1,000 kilometers of Spa and the Nürburgring. Late-season improvements into the car were integrated into the 1973 season vehicle, the B23. This included a revised suspension geometry to accommodate newer slick tires, and by the time the Springbok came around that year, a larger 2-liter Ford Hart all-alloy engine — this may be what actually saved most of those 130 pounds of weight, as information is not super consistent on these cars — also provided some more much-needed power, bringing it up to about 275 bhp and allowing the car to sweep the Southern Championship, with a combination team of Jerry Birrell, Peter Gethin, and Jochen Maas winning every race apart from the Kyalami in B21/23s, as they were called for the end of the season. 1973 brought us the B23 proper, the last of the tubular space-frame Chevrons, at least for the sports cars, and also out of left field a change of power plant, a substantially more powerful 3-liter V8 co-developed between Ford and Cosworth as an outgrowth of the 4-cylinder projects that so frequently seem to be appearing in my videos lately. The DFV, as it was called, was originally built for Formula One racing and has been mentioned as well on other videos in this channel, but it also saw use in the disappointingly unsuccessful Ford P68, Lola T80, a host of Mirages and other small-volume French manufacturers that included a DFV engine podium sweep of the 1975 24 Hours of Le Mans, and a 1-3 finish in 1980 with Monsieur Jean Rondeau, whose eponymous vehicle deserves and will eventually receive its own video for being such an excellent underdog. In the B23, as within all of the B-Series cars we've discussed so far, the DFV was mounted in the middle of the vehicle and produced, near as makes no difference, 400 horsepower and 217 pound-feet of torque, still retaining the other drivetrain mechanicals previously mentioned, even the Hewland 5-speedo probably up an uprated one. 'Twas a good year for the car as well, with 26 sold and the Mark repeating their Nürburgring win and adding class victories at the Österreichring and Targa Florio to the proverbial Chevron trophy cabinet. But cracks were starting to show in the vehicle's design, as Mr. Broadley's Lolas, also mentioned before, were now running those very stiff, lightweight, and thus dreadfully quick monocoque chassis of which he was so fond, necessitating the largest shake-up for the Chevron line since the B16 met the guillotine, this time at the request of Mark loyalist John Lepp. Despite the dramatic changes brought in with the B-26, it too was ready before the end of the season and shipped off to the Cape for a spring-box shakedown. With a new aluminum monocoque that actually maintained a similar chassis rigidity to the B-23, but ostensibly saved weight, at least over the 23, we were back to a 2-liter BDA
Lemming of the BDA.
straight 4, sourced from either directly Ford Cosworth or later offered with modifications from Hart Engineering. Power output was 280 horsepower, so still decent, but a bit of a come down from the DFV of last year on a straight oomph basis. However, the B-26 improved on its predecessors with an integrated rear wing for the first time, and updated rear suspension lifted from the B-25 Formula 2 car, and it was in with a shout of an outright win at the Kyalami 9 Hours for the first time, along with another Chevron debut victory, before getting hit with overheating problems, and surrendering glory to Reinhold Jost and Herbert Müller in a Porsche 908. The second outing of the Springbok that year, at Killarney Racing Circuit in Cape Town, proved to be the championship's last as well. The 73 oil crisis was in full swing, and the South African government banned motor racing as an austerity measure, which somehow also led to the cancellation of the final race in Rhodesia. Sales dropped as a result of the general economic slowdown brought on by a dearth of everyone's favorite Go Juice, with only 9 sold overall. The 1974 season was moderately successful, with greater success coming later in the season when that Hart engine came available, as it produced about 15 more horsepower, and somehow managed to weigh less, which allowed it to make a lap of the Nürburgring in only 7 minutes 35, which is quite commendable for the time. Nevertheless, luck failed the car with the engine, What a statement. Yes, it would also fail cars without the engine, or any other engine. But luck failed the car, partly due to the reliability of the engine, and it never achieved a podium finish in its main competition years. Undeterred, we returned to the Chevron recipe of incremental improvements, and the penultimate vehicle in our story, the B31, is where things start to get a bit less organized. Bodywork was updated, but the Hart engine was retained, at least initially, with weight now at 580 kilos or 1,279 pounds. Its debut race was at the 1,000 kilometers of Mugello, which I may be mispronouncing, in which a KVG Racing B31 took class honors. 1975 went generally well for the car, with a version of the car re-engined to run a 1.3-liter Cosworth power plant also taking home some Sports 1300 class wins, but the dominant performances and popularity of the earlier cars and years seemed to be waning, with only 6 vehicles sold. Although again, economy wasn't in good health at the time. However, this diminished glory was counterbalanced by increasing longevity, with B-31s competing until 1982 in international competition, finding subsequent success in inter-series racing running a DFV engine and driven by Rolf Goetz, including a class victory at the Avos in 1984, at 9 years after the car debuted. The final iteration of the design came in 1976 as the B-36. While still running a 2-liter straight 4 as the primary power plant choice, it was now a Chrysler Simca unit, producing 295 horsepower and 179 pound-feet of torque, although all of the old engines from previous Chevrons, that is to say BMWs, Fords, BD8, and DFVs all found their way in at one time or another. Everything else remained largely the same, but someone must have kept passing the B-Series cars cakes on the side or something, because for its swan song, the Chevron was now tipping the scales at over 600 kilos, at 605 to be specific, or 1,334 pounds, despite retaining the same aluminum monocoque, fiberglass body panels, and essentially the same running gear. The bodywork was somewhat longer than the B31, to be fair, in a quest for improved aerodynamics, but that's as may be. The racing success was also mixed, with the crowning achievements for the 21 cars produced coming with admittedly admirable 3 class wins at Le Mans in 1977, 78, and 80. The last entry for a B36, indeed for any vehicle, as best I can tell, in international competition for any of these vehicles, and certainly the oddest, but also a somewhat poetic one, came in 1987, 9 years after Mr. Bennett's death, when a Frenchman, in spite of his name, José Thibault, rebodied and re-engined a B-36 with coupe bodywork, and a Talbot 3-liter 6-cylinder to compete in Group C2 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans that year. Indeed, in a bizarre contravention of the ethos that led the B-16 to lose its roof more than 20 years prior, this T-Bolt car even had the wheels faired in for better aero. It failed to finish the race, retiring after 4 hours and only 18 laps due to an accident, which, let me do the math on that. That's 4.5 laps an hour, which means you're taking the better part of 15 minutes to do a lap of Circuit de la South. It wasn't quick. Or it spent a lot of time in the pits for repairs, which is much more likely. Unfortunately, Mr. Bennett passed away in 1978 as the result of a hang gliding accident, skeptical look, after which ownership of Chevron passed to his sisters. Despite their attempts to keep the firm afloat by bringing in Mr. Tony Southgate as a consultant, it withered without his leadership and passed from owner to owner over the years, largely focused on producing spares for cars that were still in competition. The company still exists in a rather modified structure to this date, manufacturing reproduction vehicles and spares, conducting restorations, and assisting with race preparation for Chevrons participating in historic race events. Mr. Bennett's vehicles remain popular in historic racing, with photos for this video coming from Le Mans Classic 2023, as well as numerous US HSR events over the last 4 years. To wit, Grid 5 of last year's Le Mans Classic featured no less than 15 Chevrons of various model designations, out of 82 total entries, and I had over 100 really pretty quality photos from my various sojourns to choose from for this video, which is far better than my usual 10 or 15 that make the cut. Admittedly, casting a wider sample size than I usually do as well, but nevertheless. Another unfortunate incident occurred at the Classic 24 of Daytona this year when the yellow B26 that featured heavily in this video with the black Ford intake on top crashed rather heavily in the early morning hours, to my understanding destroying the car beyond effective repair, but without major injury to the driver. That brings us to the end of this video. Final reminder, this Friday, March 1st, 2023 WEC Year in Review video. Please do come and watch along for the premiere. It's going to be a monster. For this week's call to action, not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Since I won't be including one in the Friday video. Tomorrow is, of course, Leap Day, and let us all take a moment to appreciate it as a bit of an extra free day in the year, even if it falls on a Thursday. Sing buttons and bows, go to a taco show, try a new restaurant, enjoy the nice weather if such is on offer in your general locale. Enjoy life. As always, thank you for your time this evening or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all a good night and a good tomorrow.